David for $5 says, there any place for psychedelics like mushrooms? I don't understand why God would create them, then make them edible if we can't eat them.
It's almost like, do you remember that what we used to say when a kid, God made dirt and dirt don't hurt? Right?
Yeah, so I noticed that you had a channel full of like magic mushrooms at one point.
Yeah, I rebranded that one. Yeah. That was called Fractal Universe. Universe spelled YOUNIVERSE. And that was really part of my own spiritual journey, which is kind of the same thing with Church of the Eternal Logos, is me kind of talking about how I see the world from where I'm at. And previously, I made a lot of videos promoting people like Terrence McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary, the Alan Watts type of worldview. And now I've sort of rebranded that channel as Religious Studies 101. And so it looks very similar to Church of the Eternal Logos now. And I plan on making a lot of videos on just educating people straightforwardly, factually about Buddhism, about world religions, and then so purely just based on the academic study of world religions. And then from there, if they want to hear my personal opinion, they can go over to Church of the Eternal Logos, which I view as more of a sort of ministry in a different vibe than the sort of academic study of religion, although it's obviously tainted with that perception and approach to religion.
Which kind of leads into this super chat that came in for $5, actually. And I did want to also bring up the fact that if you're going to brainwash large swaths of people, one of the best ways to do it is to use drugs and, psychological mechanisms to lower barriers. If you were a person who was stalwart in your thoughts when it came to possession, things like this, I'm sure that drugs would lower your aptitude to be able to fight these types of forces off. That seems totally reasonable to me in pretty much, every conceivable way. David for $5 says, there any place for psychedelics like mushrooms? I don't understand why God would create them, then make them edible if we can't eat them.
Well, just because something's edible, there's a bunch of poison berries out there. You can find arsenic in. I remember these sorts of kind of arguments that, when I was younger and promoting this kind of stuff too, and it was the same thing. It's almost like, do you remember that what we used to say when a kid, God made dirt and dirt don't hurt? Right?
but dirt does hurt. It does hurt.
That's not dirt. It's dog poo, dude. Don't eat it. So, I mean, in one sense, anything that exists is good.
Right.
So there's nothing in a positive state of existence that's actually intrinsically evil. That's a Christian doctrine.
Right.
So it is about, well, how is it used? Obviously, dirt has its use. Poisons have its use as well. So you really have to look at it that like, well, what are you intending to use it for? Is it a misuse? And that misuse is where there's a sin. There's something going wrong. You're missing the mark of, and it destroys. Misuse either kills you or, destroys your soul or the community around you. So those are the questions that you need to ask. Is there any type of medical use with magic mushrooms? I do know that they're actually from the synthesized magic mushroom, the psilocybin, using them for cluster headaches.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But I don't think that, they're probably doing pretty mild doses. They're not like going out of their mind or something like that. That would seem to me to be an appropriate use.
Right. Well, and like you were saying, it depends on how you're approaching everything, because everything's laden with our presuppositions. So if you're approaching it as the sort of Christian frontal as you're talking about, well, we exist right now in a fallen state. And so unfortunately, things aren't in the state of their pure goodness, and are the inebriating substances that exist in nature forms or variations or typologies of what the fruit of the tree of knowledge would have been if we didn't fall. Some type of because these psychedelics are perceived, and I think what's being insinuated in the question is somehow it's an elevating spiritual force, And therefore, why would God create something that allows me to engage in a process of inebriation that elevates me spiritually? Well, it depends on how you're even understanding and what is the advancement of spirituality in the first place.
Well,
What
like
does that look
Patrick,
like?
like you always said too, first of all, and with my epistemology, I'm always doing this. How do you know that you're in a heightened and a better spiritual state, right? How do you know that you're knowing something, right? I'm always kind of
Yes.
applying this question. And as you point out, the psychedelic community, kind of new age community, a very kind of naivism of like, well, because it feels good, right? I have this kind of phenomenology where, and the other thing too is that not just in the New Age, but I would also say within a lot of the Protestant sects and a lot of religion, there is no concept of self-deception, delusion, a prelist. So that's a great epistemological question, that you think that you think you're Jesus and can fly up there.
Right.
It's not actually true, and you end up killing yourself or something like that. How do you actually determine that you're having a good religious experience, that you're contacting good entities, right? Because they told you,
Right.
they told you like, oh, we're good, and I'm giving you a good feeling. Cannot human beings who are far less than demons fool you in that? Con artists, right? I got a good feeling from this guy, and then all your money's gone out of your account.
And that's
Sprinkle
not
some
to say
shrooms
that
on it.
people haven't got in inebriating states and had true insight. For example, me quitting them was from me doing them. And so it's much more complicated than just these simple answers. And okay, is the clinical research that John Hopkins, and we know what John Hopkins is associated with, but is the clinical research looking at PTSD and the use of MDMA and the use of psilocybin and moderated doses within clinical trials? Is it having positive beneficial results? Yes. Psychedelics dissolve boundaries at the phenomenological level, at the conceptual level. That is what they do. And so if you are having a problem where maybe you went to Afghanistan and you're reliving in a sort of boundary filled reality of memories and trauma, yeah, I could imagine that having a constructed experience where somebody gives you something that dissolves those boundaries, that allows you to get outside of it, and then you can better incorporate or understand that experience. Yeah, that might have positive beneficial effects. But when you dissolve boundaries, that also dissolves the boundaries between you and potentially the demonic or prelest or deception. And so what you're doing is you're really opening up, because where is the mind? Again, you're talking about the logisme. Where does the mind exist? I know where my brain is. I know where I'm at geographically, but where is the mind? And that's why the mind is the battlefield for our spiritual world. And I'm sure Brother Gustin probably talked about that in the part 2 that you're discussing. But where does the mind exist? And that's what psychedelic is, mind manifesting. That's literally what it meant when it was constructed by Humphrey Osmond. So then the other term they use is entheogen, which was developed by Carl A.P. Rock, and that is God within. So that is a theological presupposition that what psychedelics do then is dissolve boundaries, conceptual, cultural boundaries that prevent you from realizing that you are God. So both terms, and that's why I actually prefer psychedelic. I think it does catalyze sort of cognitive things within your own mind. That's why, depending on where you're at, in your own mind is going to really dictate how you're going to experience your trip, whether it's LSD or DMT or ayahuasca or various species of mushrooms. So it's just much more complicated than that. And they're ancient, and clearly people discovered these and they were used in various ways. It's not, that's why Christianity and Orthodoxy and most Orthodox religions, so you can look at Orthodox Zoroastrian, Orthodox Islam, Orthodox Christianity, Orthodox Judaism, Orthodox, most traditions were suppressing these practices. They were most concerned with inebriating drugs and promiscuous sexuality, because those things are going to dramatically reinvert the perception of what is right or what is wrong or how. And that's exactly what we're seeing in our own world. And so trying to stamp out or deal with inebriating drug use has been a common problem that has been dealt with Orthodox anything, any sort of religion.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. You're essentially making the case that it's kind of an out of the frying pan and into the fire kind of thing. You know, you can use these things in a way to help yourself get outside of maybe a terrible or horrific experience, kind of self-medicate, but there is kind of a deal there, right? A deal of sorts. And the bad end of that deal is that you're now lowering your own barriers from any type of suggestion that may come from the noetic,
Right.
or from outside forces. Even if it's not demonic, it would still even open you up to suggestion from other human beings with more ease, wouldn't it? Like all of these things, it seems like it's a trade-off. Seems like it's a trade-off.
Yeah, well, and that's why you see very few people who engage in high dose. I'm not talking about microdosing, but higher dose psychedelic activity. You hardly hear of anybody who then comes out of there and doesn't believe in a sort of spiritual reality. Because again, it's dissolving boundaries. It's dissolving the boundaries between us and whatever that realm is, or where it's at, or how we engage with it. Is it our mind? Is it our heart? What exactly allows us to engage in that realm? It puts you in there. It makes you more suggestible. So then when you look into theories of magic, and somebody like Alan Moore, the comic book writer who's a self-proclaimed magician, he talks about that magic is about entering the mind and exiting the mind. And so you look at Grimoire. Grimoire, is, according to him and Aleister Crowley, has to do with grammar, language. Language manipulates our mind. Magic is occurring, and this is the sort of theological then understanding of how magic is an inversion of the word, the incarnated logos, the logos itself, the word of God, and that ceremonial magic. That's why in ceremonial magic you can conjure these demons. And the point is that we as humans exist in this weird in-between space where we can actually control demons if we know their name. And naming and names becomes really, really important. And even as Orthodox, we don't want God to ever forget our name. Memory eternal, right? Because naming is a sign of possession. We want to be possessed by God. We want to be part of his family. We want to be owned by him. People who engage in ceremonial magic get into these grimoires where they find these ancient different names of various entities, they could be all over the world from different cultures. But once you have the name, once you perform the ceremony, now you as a human can enact knowledge, you can gain some type, but there is always an exchange, because it has to get something from you for you to get whatever it is that you want from it.
The classic Faustian deal.
Right.
Yep. I got to read you this. It reminded me of, you were saying too, that the use of drugs of human beings to possess other human beings, to make them more susceptible. Governments are well known, and scientists are well known for this. I was thinking about when I was teaching this course on political philosophy. Arthur Kessler's Ghost in the Machine, he has a section mutating the future, and it says, in 1961, the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center organized a symposium on control of the mind. And Professor Holger Heiden of Göteborg University made headlines with his technical paper, Biochemical Aspects of the Brain Activity. And in this, I kid you not, it says, here's the quote, in considering the problem of control of the mind, the data give rise to the following questions. Would it be possible to change the fundamentals of emotion by inducing a molecular change in the biological activities in the brain, the RNA in particular? And it goes on, and it actually names certain drugs as well. I'm trying to remember the name of the drug that makes you extremely susceptible. Oh, here it is.
LSD?
No. Tricyanoaminopropine is one of the drugs that they were working with too. And notice it's all around the same time, 1961, when they're talking about this. And here is something right in a symposium, a medical school, right? A medical center, and the scientists actually talking about, the use of drugs. And what's interesting about the tricyanoaminopropine, it's not like a psychedelic. You're not going to have this kind of, dissolution and breakdown, loss of ego and stuff like that as a psychedelic experience. They're already messing around with drugs that could make you extremely susceptible, because he goes in here, through mass communications and media,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're using media and a kind of polypharmacy. They're already going, we got to get into this. This sounds awesome.
Right.
So there is a type of, like, even without getting into, if one were an atheist or something like that, you have a concept of possession, using drugs and to manipulate and control somebody's mind. There's a loss of will to deceive them. Is it that far out to actually think that, there is a God, if there is a God, and that obviously even more intelligent beings that were not beneficent would actually want to do this too.